Resonate. In this video, I'm going to give a brief overview of the rise of ancient Rome, and then I'll be focusing in on what I believe to be the Roman Empire. Let me tell you as a man, this is a topic that is never far from my mind.
I'm going to assume that there's probably some holes in your knowledge, and today my goal is to fill those holes. Your holes.
Rome, like all good stories, started from humble beginnings. In the very early days, circa 753 BC, Rome was primarily an asylum city, a place where thieves, murderers, runaway slaves, outcasts, and more. Rome was a city of refugees and immigrants. This openness, in part, gave Rome the opportunity to become as big as it eventually became. A lot of commonly considered Roman innovation was actually heavily inspired by their northern neighbors, the Etruscans, such as their alphabet, the gladiatorial games, and political structure. From the beginning in 753 BC to 509 BC, there were 7 kings.
But in 509 BC, the last king of Rome was expelled for unsavory reasons. And from that point onward, it was decided.
The new system that was introduced gave 2 elected officials 1 year of power each, instead of a single monarch.
Which, if you think about it, is pretty crazy, because whose idea was it to let butterflies rule anything anyway?
Below the 2 elected officials was a senate of 300 patricians, which controlled the 2 elected officials. Below them were the plebs, the masses, essentially people just like the Senate, although they weren't born into the right family, and
the plebs were mad about not having any real say in politics, and after 200 years of fighting, the Roman Republic was born.
The plebs populated most of the army, so when the plebs weren't having their way, they'd threaten to immigrate and fight for other cities.
No. Consistently over time, the Senate would begin submitting to their demands. Hey, if you don't give us any.
In 390 BC, Rome was almost entirely eliminated by a surprise attack.
This spooked them enough to trigger a serious military reform. The Roman legions were divided into multiple smaller groups known as manipula, allowing them to be more mobile and more efficient in battle. Over the next 200 years, the new military style was used. 1000 IQ play used by Rome was, instead of ruining the settlements they'd conquer, and they would actually impose treaties of alliance with their newly conquered partners,
which would allow them to fuel the Roman legions, allowing them to have a seemingly endless army.
By 133 BC, there began to be a serious divide within the people of Rome, as the wealth gap grew. The Senate and the Roman people were no longer a unity. And some people did try to suggest offering.
But these people were killed by the Senate. Hey, what if we give these people that can't afford to do anything like a place to live and some food?
It was about this time Julius Caesar came about. But for as famous as he was, his chapter in the book of and literally banged Cleopatra and gave her the Egyptian throne. And pretty crazy history class crossover episode. After some time with Cleopatra, Caesar returned to Rome, giving himself the title of Imperator, which means victorious commander, and essentially became a dictator.
The people saw the writing on the wall and assassinated him rather swiftly. So yeah, there you go, that's the story of Julius Caesar. His rule only lasted 4 years.
After Julius Caesar's assassination, his 19-year-old nephew came to power and ended up ruling for 43 years.
And participants. He did not abolish the Republic, but he did not necessarily relinquish all power. He appointed himself first senator.
But although he had this power, he was able to not be assassinated. During his rule times were relatively peaceful.
And the city began to see early signs of modernization. After this peaceful period, there was an era of notably bad.
But then after that era, there's an era of good emperors, the most notable of which, and the last of which, was Marcus Aurelius.
A man who was in power from 161 AD to 180 AD. He spent most of his reign. And in between battles, he wrote Meditations, a book that today is still a bestseller and one of the most profound.
After Marcus Aurelius came his son, and under the rule of his son began the end of the good times, and the beginning of the end began.
Not long after the Roman Empire was split into 4 states with 4 leaders, which did not last long.
As turmoil between the leaders and states broke out into large-scale war for a brief period afterwards, Rome was united once more for a final time.
And the last emperor of the United Roman Empire ended his reign in 395 AD, and then his sons split Rome into two.
The eastern half would live on for another 1,000 years, but the western half would suffer and fall victim to the great migration of people causing divide.
So now that you have some context about ancient Rome, what caused it to fall, as you may have gathered, it wasn't just one thing but more of a combination of things. See, you may already have some assumptions based off the context I provided, and if you're informed, you may already have your own opinions.
Agents. But what I'm about to describe are, in my opinion, the top 3 reasons why Rome ultimately fell. 1.
As you've probably noticed, it's not entirely impossible to believe that corruption was pretty common in the Roman Empire.
Ancient Rome went through multiple iterations of political structures, from monarchies, republics, to eventually empires.
Commodus, apenas com 15 anos, tornou-se o imperador mais jovem, exemplo claro de má gestão.
He was known to be a reckless, emotional ruler, which was obviously a recipe for disaster.
The systems built by those before him made the day-to-day operations of the Roman Empire more or less self-sustaining and hard to mess up.
However, smaller things were definitely not as much of a challenge. Dude was literally a wannabe dictator, SLG gladiator, and even though he was known as a reckless, emotional teenager, he was still in power for 15 years.
Until he was eventually assassinated in a bathhouse. 193 CE followed Commodus rule and became known as the Year of the 5 Emperors.
Which, as you can probably assume, was because there was 5 different emperors in 1 year, and one of which was assassinated in only 3 months.
The Roman Empire traditionally worshipped the pantheon led by Jupiter, which was heavily tied to the Greek pantheon led by Zeus. When Christianity began to gain popularity, and the new Abrahamic faith based off of the not-so-highly favored Judaism, the Roman Empire saw new faiths as a threat to the empire as a whole. This religious discourse between the empire and the people was brutal.
Larger, bloodier battles have been fought over smaller issues. And just look at modern examples for the destruction that can be caused over religious disagreements.
Rome didn't have any sort of propaganda from Rome, like did Rome Triathlon, for example.
Which made it an entirely different battle. Now obviously we know how the story ends, as Greek and Roman polytheistic religions are now referred to as mythology.
Yet Christianity is one of the most worried religions in the world. I feel like this is often more overlooked than it should be. But I definitely feel like the transition of faith was the beginning of the transition out of the Roman Empire. Christianity was eventually mass adopted within the Roman Empire, and the church had massive power, although not everyone was totally on board. I feel like this has less to do with the fall of Rome itself, but at the time when Christianity was initially being introduced, and I feel like the introduction of this religious discourse on top of political discourse definitely poured more fuel on the fire. 3 outside opposition reasons, number 1 and 2, are not exclusive to the Roman Empire and appear in every civilization at some point.
Because at the end of the day, all political structures are just groups of people, and people are dumb.
My third and final reason falls into this basket as well, too. But I believe this reason to be the most
Reason 3 could have easily wiped out the Roman Empire by itself, and with the Roman Empire being more vulnerable from the chaos caused by the corruption and religious discourse. I believe that this third reason is the most important factor in Rome's demise. Let's focus in on one group of outside opposition to Rome. The Huns were a nomadic people, consisting of some of the most ruthless warriors of the time. They had been living across Asia and Eastern Europe, and wherever they were, others weren't.
They left a trail of terror wherever they went, to put it lightly.
And although they didn't interact with ancient Rome until later on, and they still had a big impact on how Rome fell. The massive Hun conquest caused major influxes of refugees into the Roman Empire. Now, like we originally mentioned, but unfortunately this was not the same Rome, and these were not the same refugees. Originally, people came to a growing, thriving ancients. But in this case, the refugees were surviving barbarian warriors fleeing the Huns, and they were being thrown into the middle of. Seems obvious to try to incorporate these refugees into the Roman army, right? Well, not to the emperor at the time.
As instead of incorporating them into the Roman army, and they were exposed for labor, or outcasted, as they were deemed not a threat. This lack of foresight at scale left a lot of unhappy outsiders inside the empire, causing many parts of the outer regions to be taken by these refugees.
Keep in mind, originally, when refugees came to the Roman Empire, they were accepted and given citizenship.
They were not accepted, and they were not exiled, and for the most part they were simply in a purgatory of sorts.
After the split of the Roman and Byzantine Empire, this problem only got worse and harder to manage.
In 476 AD, our barbarian king was the last to invade the Roman Empire as we know it.
Although ancient Rome was no longer, to this day the impact of ancient Rome and the Roman Empire is still very visible.
Mainly Christianity as a whole, which for the years after the Roman Empire fell, still served primarily as the government across all of Europe.
The Roman Empire had so much land to manage, too little funding for their army, too much chaos for sustainability, and too little progress for growth.